What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Build a Mind podcast. I am here joined by Carliño and Will. Carliño is our first guest, and we're very excited. He is founder. You're the founder of Digital Witness, correct?
Indeed.
So, awesome. So, Digital Witness, I'm going to let him explain what it is. And honestly, at the end of the day, I don't think I'll do a very good job of explaining it. So, I got something written out real quick. So Carliño leads Digital Witness, a real-time post-election audit effort that became the first in history to successfully verify all election documents produced by the Guatemalan voting system during the national election of 2023. So that's actually a very big deal. We know in America that our voting system is fraught with all kinds of fraud, and in every single democracy across the world, it's the same exact thing. So Carliño, why don't you lead us off and tell us what Digital Witness is, what open timestamps is, and what Simpleproof is?
Sure. Well, first of all, just honored to be here and be your first guest. I'm Carliño from Guatemala. For those that don't know, it's next door to El Salvador, sandwiched between Mexico and El Salvador. So just 2 borders away from Texas and the Rio Grande. So Digital Witness is originally known in Guatemala as Fiscal Digital. We speak Spanish in Guatemala, it's our official language. We speak many, but it's not fiscal digital. That the words don't translate directly. It's a fiscal in Spanish is a type of prosecutor or a witness, and I was one in 2019 for the election system. And I realized that we no longer verify our voting system. We only trust the results. The Oracle knows all. But as someone that believes in don't trust, verify, I figured, well, we should just fix this. And Bitcoin, I've been told, fixes everything. But I disagree. I think Bitcoiners who learn and study Bitcoin end up finding ways to use it creatively to fix things. But that's a longer meme. And so what we did was, in the case of Guatemala, all of our election documents are made public on the internet. And all we did was just organize a group of lots and lots of people to look at everything with thousands of eyeballs, and turn our own audit into an independent way to verify that what we're being told is true. And in order to do that, though, because you're talking about digital files, you have to start with how can you trust the digital information that the election system produces? Or perhaps more importantly, how do you keep the information from changing? And that's where hashing SHA-256 comes in very handy. And we discovered open timestamps, a protocol built in 2017 that allows anyone to timestamp information to Bitcoin. And I guess that should be enough to get us started.
Yeah. I definitely want to start with the first question that you actually gave us when you filled out our form. So how do you verify that Bitcoin protects the Guatemalan elections? I know that obviously being able to verify, trust, verify, all that stuff is very important. So how does that process work?
Fantastic. Well, it's easiest to just share my screen. So if you want to pop that in there. Yep. The Guatemalan election system very proudly publishes this thing, and you can go there. It's called TREP, TREP.GT. That's the website. And so when you come in here, you can click on either the first election that was held in June or the second in August. We're just going to go for June of 2023. It loads up. So what you're looking at here, people, is literally the National Election Authority's website that right now is toggling Presidente, so the presidential election. We could switch between National Congress, District Congress, municipal corporations, etc. And so here, when we're looking at the presidential election, it says this is the national level, right? So that's our little, map of our country. And so we could select districts up there, or just go down to the actual political parties and is saying, how many votes by political organization. And so all of these people are competitors in the election process of Guatemala. So all of these dudes wanted to be president. And over here, they'll tell you the amount of votes plus the percentage, right? But don't trust verify, right? Like this is just, pretty bar graphs on a screen. What our system does is over here on the right side, you have a space that says results by electoral table. Guatemala has 9.2 million voters that are registered. Those are distributed amongst electoral tables based on your residential address. And so we have between 1 and almost 25,000 of these. And so instead of looking at the national numbers, we could literally put in any number. I'm just gonna, press 17398, 17,398. So now instead of looking at a national total, you can see my screen went from 17. We're now looking at table 17,398, voting center 2,638 in the municipality of San Juan Cotzal in the department of Quiche in the country of Guatemala, right? And so the bar graphs down here are no longer showing national totals, but rather the votes from that individual table. And again, don't trust verify. This is just some fancy, cool database, bro. What's the primary source document that feeds this? And when you're looking at a table, you can actually go to this button that says ver, or look, or verify. And so when you click that, we are now looking at the actual JPEG file that was produced by table number 17,398 in the Department of Quiche, San Juan Cotzal, for president. And you have the 3 citizens who were responsible for that table, and it's Pedro, Maria, and Baltasar. And they are saying 299 citizens showed up, and these are how those votes were distributed. And so all of this tallying happens at the voting table in front of witnesses, which over on the right side, you have the signatures of the 3 citizens who were, the custodians of your vote, those upstairs, these guys. And they did this in front of political party witnesses. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 separate people signing this document. And so once they did this physically, and you can see it's literally handwritten digits, that document gets scanned and put on the internet. And so the important thing to understand is we're not talking about individual votes getting on Bitcoin. We're not talking about e-voting. We're talking about all of this paper-based voting system that has been going on for decades in Guatemala. We have a very strong tradition. We mobilize hundreds of thousands of citizens, like almost 5% of the adult population is mobilized every time we vote. And they all, hand count everything and write everything down. And so up to that point, it's very strong and secure system. But when it gets to the internet, that's where historically things kind of go a little nuts. And that's how we can verify this. And that's where this very obvious or conspicuously orange button that says verify or verificar hash, verify hash. Once you find this, you can click on it, and now you've been sent to a different database from a separate contractor that built tools for the election authority, and that's called Simpleproof. It's a Guatemalan startup that sold this immutable backup. That's what respaldo inalterable means, is an immutable backup. And what they're doing is just saying, this is the time when we received this document in our database. So our election was June 25th of 2023. And they're saying we received it at 8:38 p.m. GMT -6, so time zone of Guatemala. And then they're displaying the SHA-256, which we can say is the genetic code of this document, or the fingerprint, a unique identifier that can be summarized into a short set of alphanumeric characters. And then they're saying this information has been hashed or timestamped to the blockchain as of block number 795,946, which has a time stamp itself of June 25th, 2023, 8:43 in the PM. So that individual document, this contractor claims they had it at 8:38 p.m. and then 5 minutes later, it was already timestamped to Bitcoin, right? How you can check this yourself is, well, if you're a miner, if you've built yourself a mine, well, you should have a node, right? And so down here, there's this thing called the OTS file. The OTS file stands for Open Timestamps, and we can look at that website later. But what this does is saying, through a series of mathematical proofs, which are shown here in the OTS files, this final SHA-256 hash has been appended to a series of other hashes. And so this is the cryptographic proof that says that that information is on Bitcoin, but the folks at Simpleproof have been very smart. And instead of just showing it in a ugly text file, which I was showing you earlier, they actually now are showing it to you in this graphical interface. So what I was just showing you earlier is the same thing as this, but now we're looking at it graphically, where that SHA-256 from that file, and check my work, it's 4AB1327, starts with that, is at the bottom of this Merkle tree. And what happens is it's appended to another hash of something else that happened previously, and it turns into a mother hash, right? A new hash that is a result of two other hashes. And so you keep doing that, and that's what they did here using the Open Timestamps protocol. And you can see that that original JPEG, it's SHA-256, was included into this very long tree all the way up to this final root hash, which we see now here. We can copy it. And that root hash was sent in this transaction ID. So if you're running your own node, you can then take this transaction ID and look for it on your node. They have facilitated a link to mempool's node and mempool.space. So by clicking on it, now we're actually going into that specific transaction on mempool.space. And as soon as my internet loads, it'll show up. That's the transaction, the timestamp, 6:25 at 8:43, which coincides with the timestamp that was reported prior. And if you keep going down, you'll reach to the details. And since we copied the hash, we can just plug it in to our finder. And so in the op return function of that transaction, we find the root hash of that document. And so all you now need to do is, if you have your own node, you've confirmed, okay, there is this transaction from June 25th that contains this hash. Well, can I prove that that JPEG is actually connected through this Merkle tree? And you just pull out your, cryptographic tool set, and you just check our work and make sure that all of these hashes existed. And what that gives you is evidence and confirmation that this document, this JPEG file, exists at the very least from that moment in time. Does that make sense?
Actually, yes, it does. I'm surprised it makes sense to me. It's actually super simple.
Yeah, it's really cool. As someone who's been in the space a long time, I've seen dozens of projects that are hoping to solve election problems, ballot tabulation issues or verification issues, and they all seem to try to do too much, let's just say. And I think what you've done here, leveraging open timestamps and kind of the obvious things in the Bitcoin blockchain that allow us to prove the existence of documents or the existence of something that happens in the past, is probably the best way to go. And so, I'm curious to hear more about how you stitched all this together and how you designed the whole system, and of course how you got the government of Guatemala on board. But if it's okay with you, would you just share how you got into the position in the first place? I mean, of course, you're an entrepreneur, you're a technologist, you've designed something very cool and brought it to market. But I'd love to know how you got in the position where the government of Guatemala said, yeah, Carliño, let's use your tool.
Sure, man. So it's not just me. So as I mentioned, I lead digitalwitness.io. In Spanish, it's Fiscal Digital. And what I am is an election auditor, right? Democracy, any self-respecting democracy can trace its origins back to don't trust, verify, right? The first time any election happened, finally after you got rid of whatever monarch or dictator you had on top of you, and you had an actual voting system that people trusted, there's this, people that compete in that election want to just verify the vote counts. And it's still, you can find these people in every democracy anywhere. There's going to be an auditor at some point. And so I became an election auditor in 2019 after having been a volunteer of the voting system and having been one of those citizens who was at that table custodying people's votes. So Guatemala has this beautiful tradition of every 4 years, we just man these voting tables with citizen volunteers. And an uncle of mine had been doing this for like 20 years. And so when I finally, was legally of age to be able to do it, he was like, hey, kid, like come and learn something. And so he brought me in 2011, and I just loved the experience. It's you have to show up at like 4 a.m. They hand you this big box with all of 400 votes, more or less. So it's at this point it's 25,000 tables, 9 million people voting. It's more or less 400 people to a table. So they give you this box with everything, right? And so it's a unique voting tradition in Guatemala that I now understand is different than most places in the world, where it literally is, all right, you're a neighbor here, you care about the voting system, here's the box, right? And in the box, you have everything you need. And it includes a roll, right? A voting list of all the people that are legally able to show up. They have to show you their ID. So the first thing you do is they show up and it's like, oh, can I see your ID? Make sure that face checks, find them on the roll, scratch them out, hand them their ballots. They go into the corner. You have special people confirming that no one can take pictures as they're walking back there. Just a beautiful experience that helped me understand Bitcoin, but specifically helped me understand proof of work. Because the reason that Don't Trust Verify has such a historical kind of presence in voting in general is that at the end of the day, it's a consensus algorithm. Voting is just a way in which a group of people reach consensus about a decision, right? Whether it be who's going to be the president or who's going to go to Congress, whatever. It's just a consensus algorithm. And what tools you use, what technology you do to get to that consensus is the voting system, right? And so I realized that the fact that they're giving all of these citizens the box that contains everything and just kind of like, all right, now you're responsible. Oh, by the way, if you mess up legally, you go to jail. So don't mess up. And people show up that are sent by the political parties. So the way that the voting system is, made honest is all of the people competing in the election can send a witness, and that witness literally just stands, gets a seat right behind you, and is just watching you in your box the entire time, making sure that the only thing that comes out of the box is what was in the box in the first place, right? And if you ever do anything else, they'll call the cops and you go to jail, right? So it's just a very simple way to do something like this, but it blew me away in kind of trying to understand Bitcoin and realizing, wow, this work that I'm doing as a volunteer for the voting system is similar or effectively a mining node, right? I'm going to receive the transactions, and then I'm going to perform a hashing function to produce an output that is basically a coin join. That the JPEGs that you were shown are, I consider them coin joins. And I'm doing all of this in front of these witnesses who are validating nodes. Like, they know the rules, and if any miner tries to break the rules, they can enforce the rule set. And a miner that doesn't follow the rules can't, mine a block, right? And so I did this in 2011 and 2015. And at the end of the day, I was super proud to go online and go find my document. Because obviously when I gave my document to the dude that's scanning it, I was like, well, let me see what you're putting in that machine, buddy. Like, I showed up at 4 a.m. I, worked my butt off all day. At 6 p.m., I start counting everything in front of all these people that are like threatening to sue me and stuff. And finally I get to the output, and I just go up to a dude with a laptop, and I just hand over this proof of work, and I'm just supposed to like be chill about it, and then the press later is going to report whatever this dude puts in. I'm like, let me see. He's like, dude, chill, like, totally, you'll get your receipts, man. Like, don't worry. I was like, okay, well, give me my receipt, right? And so he finally like gave me a receipt, and I went back home, and I like went online and found my table. I was like, all right, yeah, that's literally my photograph. So I know for a fact other people in my voting center did this as well. They went home, and at night they checked that their JPEG was the same. And so I just learned how this whole thing worked, and was blown away by the sense of camaraderie and cooperation and just citizenship. Really, that's what it is. Like, we were literally building citizenship and being responsible members of the state, and for better or worse, participating in the end result, right? And realized, Guatemala has this ability to do this, and just was blown away by it. And so then in 2019, some family members decided to run for Congress, and they asked for help. And I was like, well, I was planning on going back to being a volunteer, because the volunteers are what build the system. But you know what? Let me try being a witness, right? Being a political party representative to check it. Instead of being the miner hashing, I want to be a node that's validating the entire protocol, not just at one single table, but rather in the entire system, right? And so I discovered that there's this role called the fiscal, and more specifically, a thing called the fiscal informático, or the IT witness, the IT prosecutor, who were the people that had a credential to get into the back end of the database. And so I was like, this is awesome. Like, I'm now going from having seen the table and like how the sausage gets made. Now I get to see how the website gets published, right? And it was, at the end of the day, it was pretty simple. I just got an access to an FTP server. I was supposed to have, a CSV file that would just update with the data that's coming in and being streamed out to the website, and then a folder that would contain all of the JPEGs from all of the tables. And so I'm like, great, I'm here, and I did a bunch of work during the day, and then at night I was logged in and I was looking at the folder, and it's like, all right, this is going to go from 0 to 105,000, because in 2019 there were supposed to be 21,000 of these. However, it started at 0, it went up to 10, it came down to 5, then it went up to 30, went down to 15, went up to 50, down to 20, up to 80, down to 40, up to 100, down to 0. And I'm just like, what the heck is going on? And for the first time in 2019 in Guatemala, after many voting system, many elections that had never had this problem, you would go on to the website and nothing would come up. Like, you couldn't find your JPEG. If you wanted to verify, if you were at a table, any table, you couldn't get it, let alone like me trying to get the entire thing. And I just realized, oh crap, like this is no bueno. And so obviously a lot of people started accusing the election authorities of committing election fraud. You had the candidate on the right, on the left, in the middle, like just everyone was saying the elections were stolen. And I was just like, holy crap, like it's happening, right? Like bye a democratic republic, here we go. And I was like, well, Bitcoin fixes this, right? So maybe. The other thing there is, when you realize, all right, the documents themselves, like I showed you, were handwritten. And if you can pull it up, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit, but you can tell us, like, really what you're saying is what that database is doing is it's taking this 018 up here and then the 004, and someone somewhere in a centralized database is looking at this and literally converting these handwritten digits into a database. And so it's what's called an OCR problem, an optical character recognition problem. And turns out the most famous OCR technology the world has ever had is called CAPTCHA. At least I would say that's the most famous OCR. Do you guys recognize CAPTCHA? Have you heard of CAPTCHA?
Is that like reCAPTCHA?
Well, now it's called reCAPTCHA, right? And it's when Google, you're using your VPN or whatever, and Google wants to know whether or not you're a bot, right? And so the original CAPTCHA was just CAPTCHA, and the original test, and maybe Will remembers, I don't know about Trevor, but you had two words. You had a word, you had two words next to each other, and you were just supposed to write in the words, right? This was like early 2000s, right? And what people don't know is that was actually built by a Guatemalan inventor and the most famous Guatemalan tech entrepreneur ever. His name is Luis von Ahn, and he built that and sold it to Google, right? And initially, anyone that is an entrepreneur that cares about technology in Guatemala, like, has to know that story, because it's like, at this point, dude's a billionaire, right? So it's like, if you want to be a Guatemalan tech entrepreneur, like, one of the first stories you read is his. And the reason it was so useful to Google initially is that when you were shown two words side by side, Google already knew the answer to one of them. You just didn't know which one. And so all you were doing was validating your identity by confirming that you input that word correctly, but then you were giving Google the next hint to give to the next person. And so that's how Google essentially digitized the entirety of books ever, that were ever scanned. Google just built a thing that just snipped out every word and then used our need to verify that we're not machines to turn that into digital data. But at this point, we do millions upon millions upon millions of these a day. So all of the words that exist have essentially been digitized. And so now they had to invent reCAPTCHA, which is where they're asking you about the sidewalk or where's the fire hydrant and like stuff like that.
How many traffic lights there are.
You're doing the same thing, but you're educating their AI, right? And their self-driving cars. Initially, the first application was you were turning the entire Library of Congress into a database that Google could search. And therefore, Google had an edge on their searching algorithm because they already had the entire Library of Congress and all books. And so I just was in 2019 going crazy thinking, how is it that Guatemala is going to potentially collapse as a democratic republic because we don't know how to use our own OCR technology? Like, this is nuts. And so I decided to reach out to the folks at CAPTCHA, and they said, sorry, dude, we're too busy, and so a bunch of, plan B was talk to a bunch of nerds and say, hey, let's just, I don't know if you've heard the term nerd sniping, but it's, basically there's this problem that's 100,000 JPEGs and we need to turn it into a database. Who's with me? And so a bunch of people volunteered and we built open source code to do this. But of course, the problem is, well, not of course, but a good friend of mine also, volunteering the effort, was a lawyer and said, if you produce an audit that contradicts the election results, they're probably going to accuse you of election tampering. So what are you going to do to prove that you never doctored these documents? And another nerd friend of mine was like, well, there's this thing called open timestamps, right? And so that's how we discovered open timestamps, which if you want, I'll share my screen again. I definitely think people should go to opentimestamps.org. It's awesome. It's been built since 2017. It was built by Peter Todd. It's all open source. And the way I describe it is open timestamps is kind of a compromise that emerged from the last time the money maximalists and the database users of Bitcoin kind of went to war with each other in 2017. The compromise was open timestamps. No one that I know of I've talked to a lot of people in Bitcoin, I've not met a single Bitcoiner who's against open timestamps. Like, not a single one. I don't know if you guys.
I can attest the same. I don't know a single one.
I mean, can you tell me one other thing that all Bitcoiners have consensus on? I mean, it's like that and 21 million is almost like the only thing that we can agree on. And so what this does, it's like, and it's right here. You can read all the Git and everything, but it boils down to there's this thing here that you can toss in any file. So, literally any JPEG or PDF or whatever you have in your life that is really, really important to you, you can just grab and literally just, let's see, I'm going to drag in a little JPEG here. I don't know what this is, so hopefully I don't. Yeah, it's just some random crop. And so once I did that, I can now download a document that's called an OTS file. And so what this does is through the Open Timestamps protocol, they offer this public calendar that just hashes your file into their string and eventually gets sent to a Bitcoin transaction. So this is super easy. It's similar to Bitcoin in that it's very easy for individuals, and Bitcoiners have been using Open Timestamps for ages at this point. But it's harder for institutions, for organizations. And that's where the Simpleproof people, came in. They basically built a version of this that is made easy for the authorities to use. And so but in 2019, I didn't have access to this. So some friends of mine we grabbed all of the 100,000 JPEGs before we get started on our audit. We put it into a zip file and we just uploaded it to Open Timestamps. So before we ever publish any results, the first step we did was hash everything to Bitcoin so that if our audit contradicted the results, we could prove that we never changed the documents. We just got them straight from the authorities. I even had the authorities, give me a hash with the files at that point, and I was like, all right, at least, I know I can. If my audit contradicts the results, and I don't need to keep sharing my screen anymore. But in terms of the origin of this, I was concerned in 2019 that I built something that would find potential fraud, and if I did, I'd get thrown in jail and be accused of treason, because it is literally treason to go against the oracle of the National Election Authority. And so I figured, well, if they throw me in jail, then it'll be a really interesting cryptographic and Bitcoin conversation with the judge, and we'll see what happens. And unfortunately, the system, we made a bunch of mistakes, and so we never succeeded in our audit because fundamentally it required a lot of work, and we were relying on volunteers, and there wasn't a way to incentivize volunteer work beyond just, hey, it's your civic duty, and basically when the authorities came out with the results in 2019, I had all these over 1,500 volunteers working their butts off, but then the results came out and it just tanked people's work. And I was just super frustrated in 2019, but an opportunity came up in 2020 to submit recommendations to the authorities. And we made a bunch of recommendations, but basically our main concern with them was, look, when the database was changing, and it took them 6 days to finally stop changing the JPEGs and give us one final USB stick with 101,000 JPEGs. And so it's like, well, this is 6 days after the election. Like this is garbage. Like the information they gave me 6 days after the election might as well have been garbage. And so my main argument against them, and that we became kind of viral in the press, was in the future, you should timestamp everything to Bitcoin. And there's this way to use open timestamps. Actually, it was my pre-Maxi day. So I was like, use any blockchain. Like, I don't care. Just use something, man. And so anyway, we made this proposal back in 2019 of how to improve the system, included many things. But one of them was, we boiled it down to, the system needs a blockchain certificate for its JPEGs. So fast forward from 2020, a group of nerds decided to start Simpleproof and build what we suggested. And they just, went into the election authorities and convinced them to do it. And so I'm gearing up all of my auditing efforts, and I'm ready to go on June 25th. But then, to my positive surprise, I'm presented with this verify hash button, as well as even like there's another. I mean, you can download their database, their entire database, and if every single JPEG is already accompanied in a CSV file with their SHA-256. So I was just blown away that these people, the election authorities of Guatemala, decided to heed our warnings from 2019, contract these guys, and just put it up there. I've now, since then, I've joined the Simpleproof team. So full disclosure, I now work with them, and I'm helping them do this. Like I was building a documentary, and so that's where if you go to film.simpleproof.com, you can see a documentary that I was already planning on doing called it ended up being called Immutable Democracy. And so I realized, wow, this is what you did was awesome. Let's tell the story, right? And that's where this is a 15-minute documentary that kind of goes into the nuts and bolts of it. And as a result, I end up joining them and now focus on how do we get this other places, right? Because it has been incredibly useful. For those who don't know, the election results in Guatemala for the first time in 80 years have dramatically changed the status quo. The winner of the election, I would say, is a different manager with different ownership, whereas we've had about 75 years of change in management, but never any change in ownership. And so, curiously, once the election authorities start using Bitcoin to timestamp their documents, all of a sudden, ownership changes. So, correlation isn't necessarily causation, but it certainly is a one-to-one correlation at the moment. And the reigning regime of Guatemala was upset that the election didn't go in its favor, and they weaponized the justice system, specifically the election crimes unit, and literally went after the election authorities, accusing them of election tampering. They sequestered all of the election documents, manhandled all the election evidence, and so it's election tampering. Now, no one believes anyone when it comes to anything regarding elections, except, of course, what's on Bitcoin. And so the only thing that's left after this upset, this unexpected result, and the weaponization and the inter-cabal squabble, as a friend aptly put it, the only thing that we can trust is what is timestamped in Bitcoin. And oh man, wild ride, but
that's an incredible story. I especially like how you use the analogy of Bitcoin mining and nodes to describe the human behavior around the election auditing work that you volunteered to do and others in Guatemala as well. I think, it's just a great window into your mind as a designer, a creator, how you built this, inspired by this technology. I mean, I've been saying for 10, 11 years now, the biggest thing that Bitcoin does is it changes the way we think. So, allows us to become more creative and use this new tool and apply it to real world problems where we need more trust, where we need more verification. And it's really done a great job of that. I think the story you just told is a great demonstration of how this works. And I didn't know this about Guatemala's politics and its election history, that there's always been kind of, a party in charge, and maybe some of the control changes hands, but that main leadership group or whatever hasn't changed until you install this new verification system, which is just mind-blowing.
Correlation does not necessarily imply causation. I don't want to say that we are the only source of why this happened, but because there's a lot of reasons why the results were the results. But perhaps had Bitcoin not been there, the regime may have succeeded in its attempt to frame it as an election fraud, because what they wanted was to just repeat the elections. And say, oh, election fraud happened, so now we're going to get a do-over. And that guy the guy that won, who was obviously the one that perpetrated the fraud, he doesn't get to play this time around, right? And so it's just, in that sense, it's like...
Yeah, there's two things happening. It's this change that you talk about, it's not caused by this implementation change of how the election's verified, but it's correlated, obviously. But that election you're describing was in 2019, is that right?
Oh, no. So my origin into this and why I became an election auditor was 2019. I failed at the audit in 2019 for many reasons and many mistakes. But, Bitcoin invites us to lower our time preference and realize that if you think in the long term, you can, and if you study Bitcoin, you can learn and discover things you never knew existed, and the impossible becomes possible.
What is up, guys? I want to introduce the Mastermind Club, your ultimate guide to navigating the complexities of the Bitcoin mining space with confidence and ease. Whether you're a beginner seeking guidance or a seasoned miner looking to optimize operations, this exclusive club has you covered. You'll gain access to monthly deep dives into critical topics like site procurement, equipment selection, and contract negotiation, expert-led webinars, and one-to-one consultations. You'll also receive invaluable resources like project roadmaps and sample blueprints to streamline your build-out and maximize profitability. By joining our Mastermind Club, you'll gain membership to our peer-to-peer accountability group designed to foster collaboration and knowledge sharing among like-minded builders. You'll gain access to exclusive deals on mining equipment, lower MOQs, and discounts only available to members. Don't miss out on this opportunity to fast-track your success in one of the most exciting industries of our time. Join the Mastermind Club today and turn your Bitcoin mining dreams into a reality. I've made it super easy for you guys. Just click the link on the screen right here and go to our webpage. You'll be able to sign up there. I can't wait to see you in the club. Till next time.
You can learn and discover things you never knew existed, and the impossible becomes possible. Which is what I spent 4 years basically getting ready for, was, all right, how do I make sure that in 2023, not only do I succeed at my election audit, but I succeed in real time, so that my audit can be published within a time frame that's still relevant, right? Because in 2019, part of the failure was I reacted to the election, and it took us 3 weeks to build a code. And by week 4, we had people working, and that's just too much time. Like elections nowadays, like it's just like you need to counter the falsehoods the day after, or really the night of. And it's a hard problem because in our case, it's in 2023, it was 125,000 JPEGs containing upwards of 3.2 million of these data points. And so it's just a lot of work to do. And the only way that I can conceive of doing that amount of work is what we did, which was, this is the other side, which is we partnered with a company called Stackwork. And we can bring that up again if you want to show my screen. But stackwork.com is a Lightning company based out of the States. Once you are actually inside the Stackwork interface, they'll give you jobs. And in this case, we had the enter handwritten digits job. And so any user that is able, I had my website called Fiscal Digital, which is here. This was my website. Now, we already published the report, so this is the end of the report. It's gamifying election auditing, right? Since otherwise, how are you going to motivate people to get involved in election auditing? It's like the most boring, thing in the world. Like no one wants that. It's boring and dangerous. Like, I mean,
could go to jail if you get it wrong.
Exactly, right? And it's just dull. It's more dull than monetary theory from 100 years ago in Austrian economics, right? So it's like Bitcoiners know how hard it is to get people to get excited about that. So anyway, you basically are prompted with this tutorial that just walks you through what you're supposed to do. You're like, hey, you're going to have a text box and you're going to look at a handwritten digit and you're just supposed to like put in what you see, right? And so we showed people a bunch of examples, just telling them, look, if you see this, do that, right? If you see this, do that. And we just trained people on their phones. They logged into our website. They would give us a phone number and we'd send them an SMS with instructions on how to go through this training and become part of the system. And then finally, they're presented with something like this on their screen, right? And so can you tell me what the right answer is?
002.
002.
Booyakasha. No whammy, no whammy, no whammy. Yeah, 2 points. Groovy. Right?
Yeah.
And so this is literally what we did. Yeah.
This is amazing. I'm really impressed that this is already in use by a government first and foremost. And there's so many ways to kind of take this crazy story. I guess I'm curious. So in summer of 2023, you have the system implemented, it works, and the losers are upset, and they've been around or in power for decades, and they throw a fit. You kind of describe that. What happened after that? I mean, obviously they probably didn't win their contest, I presume, right? I mean, because you have all this good proof in play. So yeah, tell us what the outcome was after they became so upset, and where things are with Guatemalan politics after the fallout of this election.
Sure. Well, I was just showing people how we literally gamified it and got some points, and even included an example of getting a wrong answer, right? But yeah, I don't need to share my screen anymore. You can take that up. But basically, the election result happened in June, and there was a runoff scheduled for August. They start throwing their fit in July. Everyone, anything and everyone that they can mobilize against this is, put in motion. And we are just one of the cogs in the wheel. The government, the election authority, right? Because election authority is a piece of the government, specifically within the justice system here in Guatemala. They're the ones that basically they're the messenger, and the regime's like, shoot the messenger, right? And so they're trying to send them to jail. And the election authorities, they've been following all the rules that were being set for them. Like, they were not necessarily like good guys. Everyone hated them up until this point. And but all of a sudden, once the result happened, like, the authorities are like, I mean, we did everything you told us to. Like, the only thing that they didn't do was steal it in their, according to, the result that they wanted. And so all of a sudden they're thrust in the spotlight. And like I said earlier, intercabal squabble, right? It's a moment of state on state violence, right? And that's one of the main messages I do want to get across to Bitcoiners is understanding, yes, the individual is usually the object of violence from the state, but that does not mean that the state does not perform violence upon itself, right? The Leviathan that is the state is so vast and large that, the right hand doesn't know what the left is doing. And often the right hand might want to go against the left hand. And definitely in the case of elections and surprise outcomes, that is the case. And so, Bitcoin is a defense cryptographic shield that can protect you against state violence, and in the case of the individual, protects you from them inflating the money supply. But in this case, it presented an opportunity for these authorities to get what we term cover your ass insurance against being attacked in any way. Like the reason they bought it was actually to defend against potential artificial intelligence attacks, right? The idea was, oh, you're publishing all these JPEGs to the internet. Like, what's keeping the loser candidate from just flooding Facebook and Twitter and etc. with fake versions of these JPEGs where you can, they claim that they win. Like, how do you differentiate fake information from real? And they realized, we don't have a plan for that. And I was like, well, if you don't, that's just gonna, it opens a lane for someone to attack you. And so they invested in the insurance, they got it. And so we did not see anyone attack the election system using AI, perhaps because we shut that door. However, what they were attacked now on was just the result and the whole election in and of itself. And so, August comes in, they're finally able to carry out the election. They carry out the runoff. They make the results official. They announce the winner. And then the authorities, these are 4 judges out of a court of 8 that after they made everything official around September, October, they all just fled the country. Like, this is like the equivalent of the Guatemalan Supreme Court judges. It's that. Then there's another level below them. And then there's the election authorities. So these are like, amongst the highest ranking judges that Guatemala has. And they are fleeing because they do not believe that they have the right guarantees to due process. And so they just flee, but they make sure to confirm who the winner was. And that's when a huge protest erupted. The way I would describe it is the pitchforks began to get sharpened. Like the people really did revolt, and they shut down the country for pretty much all of October. And the message was clear: if they attempted to repeat the elections, then they would just shut down the country, and Guatemala would be no more. We'd go back to civil war, and they have more pitchforks than the elites, right? So someone got, the other important message is, our current system that I described with the citizens manning it is awesome, is beautiful, and is the result of our last revolution in 1981, 82. And we, took the right away from the state to determine the vote totals, right? In the 70s and 60s, that was handled by the police and the military. And, that was literally what we fought and died for in our last revolution in 81, 82. But there were plenty of elections back in the 70s and 60s, and they were all fraudulent. But the difference was that the army, who was, just a series of generals being, moved, like I said, the management would change, but the ownership was the same. Those generals were trained at the School of the Americas more often than not by the USA, and the United States Empire was very much behind the regime, and then eventually allowed for the democratic process to take hold. But then now, with all of the people revolting for the first time, since there's been a revolt, the US was actually on the side of the people revolting and no longer on the side of the government. So it is pretty clear that really what tipped the scales was the fact that, and there's even Secretary Blinken of the State Department's being accused by a bunch of people from the House of Representatives demanding that there be accountability as to what intervention the State Department had with Guatemalan judges and other high-ranking people in government, where they were literally just threatened. And actually, many people lost their visas and were put on what's called the Magnitsky list, I think is the term. It's like one step shy of the OFAC list, which means you lose all of your SWIFT banking account privileges and you can no longer be banked by the US petrodollar system, which effectively means everything worldwide. Your accounts are shut down, and their visas are removed, and the visas of all of their family members. And so basically, That's what the U.S. State Department did against the judges and other high-ranking members of the Guatemalan government who were attempting to get away with the, repeating the election process. And so I forget the last numbers, but a lot of people were thrown into the system. And so finally, the highest ranking judges of Guatemala enforced the outcome. And you it's hard to say, was it Bitcoin and was it the people, or was it the fact that the highest ranking judges, had they come out in favor of the coup, essentially, right, and reverting the election result, they would have all lost their banking privileges and their visas. And so there's a good case to be made that the only reason that, so the president actually took office, the new president and his administration and the new Congress took office on January 15th of this year. And so it hasn't been until the past 4 months where we have this new government actually come in and displace the older folk. But the older folk were displaced basically because they had, the fiat gun to their heads and say, what good is all that money you've been stealing if you can't use the, money system, right? So it's but Bitcoin did play a key role in there, in that the election crimes unit, can't argue in court, oh, the U.S. is meddling with our election system. It's harder to prove, right? What they have argued is that the JPEG files themselves were tampered, right? And that they weren't legitimate. And that argument is one of the arguments that they're making in court. The court proceedings haven't begun, but once the new government came in and took office, the election authorities came back from having fled to the US and are now back and have presented themselves in court. And we shall see if the court proceedings will require that they prove that the election tampering never happened. And if they want to make that case, their best way to do it is Bitcoin, right? So anyway, it's a long, probably way too much detail on the Guatemalan political situation, but it's this, I live in the upside down world, right? Guatemala has always been a unique laboratory where things get tried out to see, what happens. You literally could go back to the 50s when, I believe it was, there was this famous cases of sexually transmitted diseases that were being spread purposefully in Tuskegee, I think, or something is the case, right? Back in the 50s. So, I don't know if you know what happened, but they stopped performing those tests in Tuskegee and they started doing it in Guatemala, right? So yeah, we are a great petri dish for unique experimentations. But regardless, is whatever your opinion might be, it's a lot of people in Guatemala fought very hard to make sure that the election outcome was respected. And for better or worse, given what the election tampering that was carried out by the election crimes unit, the only independent arbiter of truth, or at least for what happened on election night, is Bitcoin. And so I get attacked by folks on the conservative side that claim that Bitcoin was basically only used to whitewash election tampering, because what they're saying is the JPEGs were tampered before you put them on, before the authorities put them on Bitcoin. And Bitcoin can't preclude from that being the case. What defends us against that is the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of people at the tables who took their own pictures, right? And so if the authorities took the insane risk of tampering election documents before publishing them to the internet, well, all they have done is left cryptographic proof on Bitcoin forever that anyone could demonstrate is false. And so you just need to talk to any one of those 10 people at that table. And then because the winner of the election won with a voting spread of 220,000 votes, I mean, you would need to tamper something like 2,000 of these documents, which means that there's 50,000 people in Guatemala that could have pictures that prove election fraud. And I've yet to see a single one. No one has actually sat down with me and saying, I know, citizen volunteer, mining node X dude from voting table such and such, and here is his personal, file. I've yet to meet a single person to do that. And I'm like, well, these people aren't serious then, because you should literally be able to throw a rock and hit one of these 50,000 people and find a JPEG. And all that happened, and that's the other really beautiful thing about all this, is timestamping does not benefit anyone other than those that want truth.
So it leads me into one of my other questions, because so we actually have in America, we have a voting or our electoral system coming up. We're going to be voting for our president, and thinking about last cycle between Biden and Trump, there was a lot of upheaval about like whether or not there was election fraud, voting fraud, and all that stuff. And, I don't want to get political here. Doesn't matter right or left. It doesn't matter who wins. What matters is that we verify that the person who won is indeed the winner. So I guess so Guatemala is a lot smaller than the United States. The United States has over 3,000 counties in 50 states. How do we implement a system like this? Because we don't do the same type of voting system.
Well, so I really appreciate the question. I would say my understanding, like you said, there's the counties are the ones that carry out the actual voting, right? The voting system isn't a federally organized system, right? It's not the feds who you show up to vote with. It's right. Usually your neighbor, right? And so in my experience, it's usually some nice lady from down the street or something that is trying, she still cares about democracy, and she was brought up thinking that it's her civic duty. And God bless her for that, because if it wasn't her, then maybe the feds would show up. And I think it's just better that the U.S. has the opportunity to vote with your neighbors. Now, the election authority in your county, they have to work within a framework, which is usually the election law that is approved by the local state legislature. And so what does your local authority have? What kind of liberty do they have to perform the voting system? Well, I would say, I don't know. It's 3,000 different counties, so it's up to them, right? So it's 50 different states with 50 different election laws. It's just, there are as many voting systems in the states as there are counties, essentially. And so it's a matter of, if you're a Bitcoiner who sees this as an opportunity to reach your neighbors. Again, I agree with you. Don't get political. Who gives a crap? This is Bitcoiners are here for truth, right? Bitcoin is truth. And all you're talking about is, I just want to verify that I'm not being lied to. I could care less. I know that both of them are, I know that it's all rotten. It's exactly. I don't that's not why I'm doing this. I'm just, and this is my personal motivation. I'm not doing this anymore because some family member is running for Congress. They're not. I'm doing this because I understand that this, having spent a fair amount of time trying to tell, close friends and family members about how awesome Bitcoin is, very poor results. I don't know what your experience is, but I mean, it's
mixed results.
It's out of everyone that how many people have you been able to actually reach with?
Two. Yeah, I've been at this a long time, so it's quite a bit. But I mean, dude, at a certain point, you learn people will come to this on their own time, and you can put it out there. If they ask you, come to you, you can help them, but otherwise let them come to it on their own time. I don't do much boots on the ground evangelism anymore these days.
Sure, because it's money, and people have strong opinions about their money, and they don't trust yours, I think is what I've learned. However, when it comes to democracy and voting system and election results, that's got nothing to do with your money, man. That's just, hey, how do we get to the truth, right?
Right.
And what I saw in my table when I was running it is like, this is a little truth machine that we have here. And so if anyone in the world should grok Bitcoin, it's these people that I'm working with to do this, and they're already a part of this consensus algorithm. So like, all digital witness is just my way of creatively getting to those people to provide a different touch point. I think fiat will destroy them eventually, and they'll have to come to Bitcoin for money. And those that don't, they'll regret it. But I don't want to wait 20, 30, I mean, however long it's going to take for everyone to get it, by force. I would rather my neighbors get it earlier. But obviously, I don't want to, be the evangelist. Well, I am. Like, I'm known as the crazy, Bible pushing Bitcoiner. But this is just, my way of saying, all right, that argument didn't work. How about this one, right? Like, did you pay attention to what happened to the elections? Hey, Bitcoin played a role in it. And this is no longer something over there in fantasy land where, the NFTs and whatever, thing that I'm getting accused of selling. It's like, no. This is real world stuff. And now I can go to anyone in the executive branch, anyone in the legislative branch, anyone in the judicial branch, and they've heard about this in some way.
Are you ready to discover your mining potential and take your mining game to the next level? Join us this summer for a game-changing opportunity, an exclusive one-day Build a Mine Bootcamp at the Bitcoin Conference in Nashville, Tennessee. Learn from the very best, gain insights from industry experts and top operators who have mastered the art of efficient and profitable mining. Avoid costly mistakes. Don't waste time and resources on trial and error. Learn proven strategies to grow your operations quickly and efficiently. Save time and save money. Get the same invaluable content and guidance offered in our quarterly 3-day bootcamp condensed into a single intensive day. Perfect for busy miners on the go. Equip yourself for success to discover when to invest in equipment and property, and when to seize opportunities in the world of Bitcoin mining. Don't miss out on this exclusive opportunity to revolutionize your mining operation. Space is limited. Secure your spot today. I've made it super easy. Go to the link up here and you'll be able to access the Build a Mine Bootcamp one-day intensive class. I can't wait to see you guys there.
I can go to anyone in the executive branch, anyone in the legislative branch, anyone in the judicial branch, and they've heard about this in some way, right? And so instead of starting from scratch with whoever, whatever bureaucrat you're talking to, or your neighbor or your family member, it's like, well, you remember what happened with that, election fraud accusation and what they were saying there was tampering. Remember what proved that didn't happen? Like, that was Bitcoin. And, Bitcoin can do that. It's like this curious little side note that everyone has consensus on called open timestamps. And, it's just small little thing. And, if they're exposed to it, and in the case of literally the presidential, executive team, they know that they are there in part thanks to this. Like, they can't take that away, right? And so their mind, which has been covered with an enormous thick layer of FUD, has kind of something's pierced through, and now I can talk to them about that and just focus on that. And
what an amazing roundabout circuitous path for orange pilling people in Guatemala. That is just
Absolutely.
well, it's the volunteers, they're about 150,000 Guatemalans, and then the political party witnesses are anywhere between 100 and 200,000 extra Guatemalans, plus all the people that compete. And so it's like, it's the most efficient way to get at about 500,000 Guatemalans. And my mission in life is to make sure that Central America, but starting with Guatemala, adopts Bitcoin faster than everyone else, because I think it's a race. Because if I'm able to get 500,000 Guatemalans to adopt Bitcoin, I think that's the fastest way to get this country out of poverty. At least that's something I can do within my lifetime. And, if the cool thing is it's a collaborative race. It's, hey, I did this here. That doesn't mean that it's proprietary. Cypherpunks write code, and so it's just, let's fucking go, right? Like it's potentially not going to work exactly the same way that your county is. Like, they don't produce the JPEGs, and you're going to be upset because that's been like the main argument from Bitcoin. It's like, dude, I wish I had JPEGs. Like, you guys got an awesome system. And it's like, yeah, I know. That's why I'm doing this. And
you heard it here from him first. Guatemala is going to be better than America in 10 years. You heard it.
Well, I would say the Guatemalan voting system is by far one of the best voting systems on the planet.
I would agree after everything that you told us. I mean, just I'm 27 years old. I'm gonna dox my age, and this will be the 4th election cycle that I've been a part of, and it is so convoluted. It is so hard to navigate and coordinate that it almost makes young people like myself, who we're supposed to be the new generation, trying to fight for the democracy that is our world. And it really just it beats you down. It makes you want to just give up, because you're like, what's the freaking point? You know what I mean? And so if we could even, halfway, like, in half of those counties across the United States, implement something like what you're doing, it would make it feel more visceral.
Yeah. I think like what Trevor's saying is, again, I've been a part of many more election cycles than that. And every single one, I think I voted once for a presidential election out of 5 opportunities, or 6, I don't know. But, just because, again, it's like my vote doesn't count. It's being canceled out by someone with less information who's dumber or whatever, like all the little rationalizations that a lot of us, cypherpunk oriented, libertarian-ish type Bitcoin folks, we just don't have a lot of trust in the system. And so I'm curious, a couple quick questions.
Yeah.
You feel that you were successful in the 2023 efforts that you put forth with your systems and helping the Guatemalan government verify the election?
So if you can share my screen, I'll tell you what I feel actually proud of. So like I said, I gamified election auditing, because no one cares about this as much as I do, and the only way to get people to care is to gamify it. And so these are the top 10 users of the Fiscal Digital, or digital witness game of Guatemala. And you can see, like, those points, someone got all the way up to 380,000 of these, right? And number 10 was 112,000. But if you squint, you might be able to read that those points are called sats, right? Because up here, going back to, and you can't see it on the screen, but there's a little green arrow that when you hit it, it says paste invoice. So now every single person that helped me, if they learn how to generate a Lightning invoice, can then turn those points into sats. And so what this means is, by gamifying the post-election audit, I've been able to create this game that every 4 years I will be able to remind people about. And so every 4 years is when we vote. And that just coincides with the halving cycle. I don't make the rules. It just, I see it as a way of turning this thing called the voting system, the elections, that just absorb an inordinate amount of energy from society. I mean, just the amount of time that people spend arguing and fighting over, turns that into the 10,000 Bitcoin pizza moment. And so the other thing is, the main people that help me do this are young people, usually below the age of 18. If you go to our TikTok, which is here, we had a little video that became viral, and I think the character in the video shows you a sense of who's doing this. And I didn't pull this up earlier. Sorry about that. So loading, but anyway, it's young people that can't vote because it's, a 16 or 17-year-old is bombarded by propaganda, isn't jaded like Will is, but they're upset that they can't vote. They're being told that this is existential. The whole world is going to go, down the tubes if we don't do something about this. But they can't vote, and so we just made videos to try to appeal to that audience. And this one really took off, man. I mean, just like almost 50,000 votes within less than 24 hours on TikTok. That's absurd,
Pretty good.
And so anyway, my point is, it's a way. I mean, you were saying you don't vote, like, Groovy man, like, I don't care. None of these people do either. Like, auditing the election, I'd say, is more powerful even than voting.
Yeah.
And people that can't vote can still audit, and they can perform. They can just forces and be part of this game that they will always remember as the place where they got their first sats. And if they didn't claim their sats, because we didn't tell them anything about this, they just, the more active dudes on social media were like, "What the heck is sat? Like, what do you mean invoice? What do you like?" And they just figured it out. Now, some people haven't, but I'm pretty sure 10 years from now, I'm going to start getting email from people saying, "Hey, I was a user in 2023. I was like, I mean, not your keys, not your coin, buddy." So it's just like, how do you condense an entire, Bitcoin education into the, shortest amount of time to reach the greatest number of people the fastest way possible? And it, has been a forcing function to understand all these other things of why Bitcoin's valuable and matters. Like, for example, timestamping, and the fact that, I want to live in a world where if I am ever sued by the state and potentially accused of treason, that the information that are going to be put forth in front of a judge is immutable and can be trustlessly verified. Like, and this even transcends democracy. I think, yes, if all election documents produced by all voting systems everywhere were timestamped to Bitcoin, all elections would be somewhat better off. Yeah. I can't say to what degree. I can't venture to say it'll be perfect, but they will certainly be somewhat better off. And that's where it's like what you were saying in terms of the US. Any county anywhere produces some form of election evidence. And if they don't, then it's not an election, right? It's not democracy. If the evidence disappears, I mean, but it actually transcends that. And so that's why I'm working on now with Simpleproof, of just how do we use the election as a case study to prove the value of having an independent database that anyone can verify, so that if anything changes, there's proof, right? Yeah. And how do we use that to get it into other areas of government?
Yeah, it could even just start with some of these hotly contested counties in the U.S., like Maricopa County in Arizona or Fulton County in Georgia, or there's.
I want to push back on that, Will.
Okay.
That's where people usually go to. And I'm like, no, man, it starts with your county. It starts with your neighbor. Like, don't, like, the places that Maricopa, those places, those are lost. Those are already part of the clown show. Those are like the main stage. Like,
I agree with you. And I think people will, it will be a massive tell when they have vociferous pushback against adopting a system like this. And it's like, well, why? You're not interested in the truth, huh?
Yeah.
But like, if you're a Bitcoiner, like, I would say, don't start there, man. Go to a place that has always has a really strong tradition and like where the lady, like, where you can knock on her door and be like, "Hey, Sue, it's me, you remember me?" And it's like, "Of course, I haven't seen you in ages, buddy." Like, I mean, there are places that still have that, like, small town feel, right? And you're just like, "Hey, I want to audit the elections. I think there's this, I don't care who wins. I just care about truth, and you'll be surprised. She'll probably say, like, "I always put everything out there. No one shows up. Like, no one cares anymore. It's the kids nowadays, they don't care about nothing," or something, right? And you're just like, "I care." And
this is such a fascinating story. I mean, I think, Trevor, I think we're going to need to have Carliño back and get even deeper into the story. I mean, the details are what's so fascinating about this. All the ebbs and flows of how things went during, that whole summer and through the fall to January of this year. I mean, I think it's going to become more and more relevant to talk about this kind of thing as the US election approaches and the whole world is watching that. Another quick question, Carliño, for you. Do you get a sense that the Guatemalan people feel that this new system was a success and that they are valuing it?
So I'd say we're very tribal, unfortunately, just like everywhere else, right? And so there are the people that are happy with this, and there are people that are against this. And in our case, again, I live in the upside down. The government that won is very progressive, and so there's a lot of progressive people that on social media are like, God bless you guys, whoever got this thing in there, you literally saved this from collapsing. But then you've got people on the conservative side saying this is just whitewashed, there's more crimes under this. And so it's a long game, right? To me, it's the people that matter more than just the general populations now hearing the words immutability and Bitcoin strung together. They'll get it eventually, but it's more of the people that actually did work and earned sats. And that's we had 1,700 people sign up. We had a test to cull that down so that we made sure that people were giving us good information. 1,000 people went through that test, and those 1,000 users earned over 66 million sats, right? So
dang, wow.
Those and of those 1,000, the top 100 earned a lot, and you just saw the top 10 earned a lot more. And so it's a what is it? It's an IQ test, right? It's you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. And so what I'm working toward is, and my promise to Guatemala is, in 2027 I will return. We will come back with more of this, and we'll just invite people to say, oh, here's our top scorers from last time. You want to compete this time? And my guess is there are going to be more people wanting those sats, but it's just going to be so much harder to get because we'll probably pay less sats than we did in 2023. And for those that don't, they'll just realize, wow, if I had just done this for a week in 2023, I could have, I'd be set maybe, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to do just every 4 years. And so I'm guessing, our election is 2027, but then it's 2031, 2035. And I'm thinking, by 2039, I will have, gotten the entire Guatemalan people sufficiently orange pilled to where this just, is not necessary anymore. But
yeah.
It's the low time preference of doing this constantly. However, in the interim, there is a lot that can be done where people are demanding, hey, if the election system has that proof, why don't we have the same for our finance ministry, for contracts? For every single thing that the government touches, I want immutable proof. And we're hoping that starts to have more echo, and Guatemala becomes the first country in the world where every single public document is timestamped to Bitcoin.
That could be very cool. That could be massive. And you have a neighbor in El Salvador that is doing great job at orange pilling its population and other people nearby, so I think there's a lot of momentum from a few different angles that are going to support you in your effort. Yeah. And we'd like to support you too. I think I've seen a ton of these proposals and project ideas for election, this and that, voting this and that on the blockchain. And they all have some convoluted sort of economic incentive thing going on that involves some other token and doesn't really solve the problem it claims it can. And this is a massive step forward. I don't know if it's a perfect solution. I'd love to talk more about vulnerabilities in this system the next time we